handedly for many years.
Wow.
In spite of this, the family was often visited by tragedy. Of 9 children, only 4 of them lived to be old enough to marry. The oldest son, Louis, died in the same year as his father. Daughter Sarah Mulford's husband was murdered on the front porch of the house after the Civil War. The war itself wreaked havoc on the Myrtles and the Sterling family. Many of the family's personal belongings were looted and destroyed by Union soldiers, and the wealth that they had accumulated was ultimately worthless because it was in Confederate currency.
Yep.
Confederate currency was so worthless, Krysta, that if you gave a Confederate dollar to a baker to buy bread, he would put it up against the bread and slice you off a piece as thick as the dollar that you gave him. Which means, yeah, it was a piece about... You see how much room there is between my hands? Yeah, that's about how thick it was. Confederate money was famously bad.
Wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, basically.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw these at your face, and let me tell you, it will hit your nose, and your nose will break without me touching it.
What are you talking about? Where does this come from? Where are you?
Nope.
Take these, spin them, and then yeet it at their face.
Why?
Because she's feeling angry and aggressive. I don't know.
Why are you feeling angry and aggressive?
Stop being so darn ignorant when they're adults.
This was back in the 1860s.
Believe it or not, some people are still that ignorant. Not saying any of our listeners are, just some people are still ignorant.
No. So where are we?
We're 12 years after the death of Ruffin Sterling and after the Civil War. William was named as agent and attorney by Mary Sterling to help her with her remaining lands, including Ingleside, Crescent Park, Botany Bay, and the Myrtles. In return, Mary gave William the use of the Myrtles as his house. Times were terrible, and William Winter was unable to hold on to it. By December 1867, he was completely bankrupt, and the Myrtles was sold by the U.S. Marshal to the New York Warehouse and Security Company on April 15, 1868. 2 years later, however, on April 23rd, the property was sold back to Mrs. Sarah Winter as the heir of the late father, Ruffin G. Sterling. It is unknown just what occurred to cause this reversal of fortune, but it seemed as though things were improving for the family once again. Not long after that, tragedy struck the Myrtles once more.
No offense, but I don't think I'd want to live there.
According to the January 1871 issue of the Point Cooper Democrat newspaper, Point Coopee Democrat.
Not my friend Cooper.
Winter was teaching a Sunday school lesson in the gentleman's parlor of the house when he heard someone approach the house on horseback. After the stranger called out to him, saying that he had some business with him, Winter went out the side gallery of the house and was shot. He collapsed onto the porch and died. Those inside the house, stunned by the sound of gunfire and retreating hoofbeats, hurried outside to find the fallen man. Winter died on January 26, 1871, and was buried the following day in the cemetery at Grace Church. The newspaper reported that a man named E.S. Weber was to stand trial for Winter's murder, but no outcome of the case was ever recorded, and as far as we know, Winter's killer remains unidentified and unpunished.
Wow.
Sarah was devastated by the incident and never remarried. She remained at the Myrtles with her mother and brothers until her death in April of 1878 at the age of 44.
Poor Sarah.
After the death of Mary Cobb Sterling in 1880, the Myrtles was purchased by Stephen Sterling, one of her sons. He bought out his brothers but only maintained ownership of the house until March of 1886. There are some who say he squandered what was left of his fortune and lost the plantation in a game of chance, but most likely the place was just too deep in debt for him to hold on to. He sold the Myrtles to Orrin D. Brooks, ending his family's ownership. Brooks kept it until January 1889, when No, not long at all. When after a series of transfers, it was purchased by Harrison Milton Williams, a Mississippi widower who brought his young son and second wife, Fanny Lintott Harrelson, to the house in 1891. And no relation to Woody, just based on the spelling of the last name. Also, I think Woody may be Canadian. Not that Canadians can't be related to Americans. That's not saying that. Injured during the Civil War, in which he served as a 15-year-old Confederate cavalry courier, Williams planted cotton and gained a reputation as a hardworking and industrious man. He and his family, which grew to include 7 children, kept the Myrtles going during the hard times of the post-war South. But tragedy was soon to strike the Myrtles again. During a storm, the Williams' oldest son, Harry, was trying to gather up some stray cattle and fell into the Mississippi and drowned.
Oh.
Shattered with grief, Harrison and Fanny turned over management of the property to their son, Sergei Minor Williams.
Oh, what a name.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like Surge with a T. Maybe it's Sergette Minor Williams. I'm not sure. He later married a local girl named Jessie Folks and provided a home at the Myrtles for his spinster sister and maiden aunt, Katie. Secretly called the Colonel behind her back, Katie was a true Southern character. Eccentric and kind, but with a gruff exterior, she kept life interesting at the house for years. By the 1950s, the property surrounding the house had been divided among the Williams heirs, and the house itself was sold to Marjorie Munson, an Oklahoma widow who had been made wealthy by chicken farms. It was at this point, they say, the ghost stories of the house began. They started innocently enough, but soon what may have been real-life ghostly occurrences took on a life of their own. Now, let's talk about... now, before we get into what this is, we're not going to talk about Chloe just yet. Let's just go into the hauntings. Yeah, Chloe is a character that a lot of people believe had stuff to do with the house, but near as we can tell, she never existed.
I see. Shouldn't we, before we go into the haunting stuff, shouldn't we take a moment to be sponsored?
Is that not? Yeah, we probably should. I don't even have that on here. Thank you for noticing.
Yeah.
So we'll take a moment and for a word from our sponsors, and then we'll come back and talk about the hauntings at the Myrtles.
Yeah.
Well, that should do it. How do you feel, hon?
I feel sponsored.
Yay. I love you. Okay, so let's talk about the hauntings at the Myrtles.
And so, hauntings overall? No specific haunting. So, there's been a lot of talk about hauntings from the Myrtles.
Lots of it. And there are those that, because the place pushes some of the false history that it does, that don't believe it's haunted at all, because a lot of it's made up. But
right.
If we just stick to what I've told you, which is all factual, deaths of people through yellow fever and various illnesses.
Yeah, a lot of death, a lot of
sadness, a lot of despair, people drowned.
All kinds of stuff.
There is definitely enough bad juju to cause a haunting. And when I say bad juju, I mean bad magic. I'm not talking about Juju, our friend from It Goes Down in the PM.
Right, yes, I know that. Because she's bad in a good way.
Now, I went through the stuff I went through TripAdvisor because Matt from Graveyard Tales is a big proponent of TripAdvisor for haunted places, because people will include stuff there. And the thing is, I found a couple of things, but they're They're lacking in details, but I'll share with
They're
you.
vague.
Yes.
They're very vague.
We saw 3 young children in the garden next to the tea house, accompanied by a lady with a green headband. We thought that they were actors for a reenactment. We went to ask the staff if they had hired actors, and they hadn't.
Uh-huh.
And that makes me wonder if it's Sarah Ruffin. And I guess, no, it's Sarah Woodruff, sorry.
Yeah.
Because she died of yellow fever, and 2 of the 3 children died of yellow fever.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder if that wasn't a residual haunting, or like we tend to address it with the stone tape theory, and like it was just playing a memory, basically.
Right. Or a happy time that just repeats.
Right. Now, someone else posted that they were happy to say that their wife and they had a positive experience at the plantation. They were lucky to experience a paranormal episode and enjoyed spending the night in the Fannie Williams room. Tom was an excellent guide. He is highly recommended, but they don't say what the paranormal experience was. I don't know if they saw ghosts or if they felt touched. Both are fairly common at the Myrtles, so...
Yep, couldn't be.
Now, the Myrtles Plantation rumored to have been built on an Indian burial site. Specifically, it was built on a burial ground of the Tunica peoples, who were known to live in the Mississippi River Valley. Many say the paranormal activity of the house is due to the spirits of those who are buried underneath the plantation. The ghost of a young indigenous woman has also been spotted around the plantation property. Africa Gale Sterling has been seen in her former room where she passed from yellow fever. Mrs. Sterling hired attorney William Drew Winter during the Civil War to help handle the plantation's finances. After the war, they found themselves dead broke. Their assets had been based in Confederate currency, which had become worthless after the war. They had to sell the plantation, but were able to get it back 2 years later. Winter was mysteriously shot dead 2 years later, which we talked about. Yes. And his is a common ghost that is seen on the plantation, often in the gambling room, or in his bedroom, what would have been his bedroom at the time, or in the what they call the male parlor.
Right.
The men's parlor. So he's another one that's seen quite a bit, and that makes sense to me because his ghost was never, his murder was never solved. He was killed by someone that no one knows, and so yeah.
That would
yeah.
lead, if anything was going to lead to somebody being stuck someplace, that would be something that would do it. I definitely hear ya. Now,
the ghost of a young girl who died in 1867 also haunts the Myrtles Plantation. She died of unknown causes, but a voodoo priestess attempted to save her life by performing magic rituals, which ultimately failed. Obviously.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Her ghost has been spotted in the room where she passed away, and guests claim to have woken up to a young girl practicing voodoo on them while they slept.
Fun.
Soldiers, both Union and Confederate, have been seen on the grounds as well. And while ghosts of Union soldiers have been seen on the ground of the Myrtles, there is a story that states that 4 Union soldiers found the place and intended to loot it. They went into the place and began to look around, and when they were ambushed by either family or Confederate troops, depending on who's telling the story, and they were killed in the parlor. From that day to this, as the legend goes, their blood stains remain on the floor and nothing has managed to clean them.